Well, hello and welcome to another TransForm Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I'm pleased to be joined by Sarah Mitchell, head of our documentation department. Now, this week we are going to be continuing our discussion on TPL, the TransForm programming language. So let's jump right into it. We're also here to answer questions, so if you do have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So this is week 3 of the TransForm programming language. In the first week, we talked about what TPL is and how you can use it. Last week, we dove in and took a look at expressions and statements and variables. And this week, we're going to be talking about events, also known as event handlers. Now, these are the places in TPL, or these are the places in TransForm where you can attach TPL code that fires when something happens. When an event happens, it handles it, hence the name event handler. So let's take a look at these. This is actually going to be, I think, a pretty quick session here today because it's not very complicated, I'm happy to report. There are two kinds of event handler triggers that can trigger TPL in TransForm, and those are form level events and field level events. And so a form level event, we'll take a look here on the right, are things that happen sort of at the form level, at a higher level up. So for example, when the form first loads, you can have something fire. For example, you could set some default values. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. Or when you close the form, you could have it do some other sorts of things, maybe make an API call or something like that. Render, we'll get into in a minute. And then down here are the different types of editors that happen on the field level. So if you recall just a minute ago, I said there's form level event handlers and field level event handlers. So here's a simple form that I built, and it's just got some fields here: item, color, weight, length, width, whatever. And over here, I'm able to hook up some code to one of these by simply clicking on its button. So if I were to hook up code here, say in the changed event, I would click on that and it would open up a code window for me to put in my code. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But the point is that that code would only fire when I've changed whatever the value was in item, or when, and a change might mean that was blank, but then I set it to something. So that counts as a change as well. The render event is a form level event. May as well get that one out of the way. This one fires lots of different times. And one place you can use it is, for example, if you want to know when the status of a form has changed. So maybe you haven't yet closed out of the form, but you want to mark the form as approved or give it just a different status. It's one of the statuses you can set up. And that can fire off the form then. It also fires off basically anything, anytime something on the screen changes, is that render event. So render fires lots and lots of times, and it's used sort of as a catch-all. And speaking of catch-alls, we're going to go take a look here at these three: these editor catch-all, change catch-all, and button catch-all. So for the editor and changed on the field level, like I said, changed fires an event when you make a change to a field. Editor fires when you begin making a change to the field. So let's say you tap on a number field and the number editor appears. That's when that appears. So that's often used, not necessarily with numeric fields, but it'd be often used in drop-down fields where maybe you want to automatically populate that drop-down field at the time that you go into the editor. Maybe it's based on other settings. For example, maybe you have selected a make for a car and you clicked on editor and for the model, and it loaded just the models that were available for that make. So the catch-all events are if you don't have something set up for editor or color or weight. If you create a catch-all event, that catch-all event will run in place of basically what you don't have in one of these. Once you put in an event into item, for example, that item catch-all, that will no longer fire for this particular item. So these are in fact catch-alls. They only work if you don't have something else defined. You may use these, you may not use these. You'll see, it depends on on your situation. Now it looks like I've got a question, so let me go take a look at that. And nope, it looks like I'm wrong. Let me see, is there something here in the chat? No, Sarah just posted something into the documentation links. If you want to review last week's material, you'll find that in the chat window. All right, let's go on. Hopefully this kind of makes sense. So before you start using events, you need to make sure that your form has been set up properly. And here we're going to do with a little bit of audience participation today. I know I don't normally do that, but I want you to take a look at the way I've set up the form on the left and the form on the right. And can you tell me why the form on the right is right? Give you 30 seconds. I will not sing the song to Jeopardy, though, during that time. So does anyone see why this guy over here has been set up properly and this one is not? Take a good look. Oh, come on, you guys. You let me down. I was sure someone would get this right away. All right. Wow. Yep. One person's gotten pretty close. If you take a look here in my commands here have got names. So instead of something that's simply called button 1, I've given that object a name, my button. My photo field, instead of calling it field 8, I've called it photo. Height, for example, instead of field 6, I've called it height. By default, this is what TransForm is going to set up for you when you first build the forms. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go in and edit those commands so that they have proper field names, because you're going to need those proper field names later on. Oh, I see Sarah got it. Well, Sarah, I expected you to get that one, but thank you. All right, so I'm moving on, and we're going to take a look here at a live demo. So let me just pop open TransForm. And we're going to go into the designer. And I'm going to select a form that I've already created, the form that I was just demonstrating a moment ago, this test TPL form. And here you could see all the items, weights, lengths, so on. Excuse me one second. All right. So if I wanted to go in and edit my TPL, what I do is I select my form here. I've shown this to you a couple times, but it's hidden, so I'm going to show it to you again. I'm going to select my form here. I'm going to go down to where it says Advanced Features. I'm going to make sure Enable Custom Code for this form type has been turned on to yes. And then I'm going to click the Edit Custom Code button underneath. So I'll click on that. Oh, thought I clicked on that. Great, and the editor slides in. Now I've got a couple of things that have already been set up. Let me just clear them out of here so that I can give you a proper demo. And I did some here. Let me delete that. Okay, so far I don't have any form blocks. Let me just save and go back in. Everything there's been deleted. Great. So let's first start wiring up one of these form level handlers. So let's use the load one. That's a pretty common one. And this one is typically used, well, you can use it for a bunch of reasons, but it's often used maybe just for setting up a default value. So for example, I'm going to say color is equal to blue. Except I made a little mistake. It's supposed to be hashtag color is equal to blue. And if you recall from last time, that is what indicates that it is a field. It's by putting that hashtag in front. Now, if you forget the syntax, you can actually go over here into fields. And if you click on one of them, say weight, for example, you'll see it's inserted it for me at the insertion point. Let me just get rid of that. So let's go ahead and save. When the form is first open, you should just set the color to blue. Let's make sure that one works, and then we'll go on to a little bit more robust example. Okay, so that's there. Let me open up my phone. Oops, open. And I'll turn on screen mirroring. And that should be launching here in a second. There we go. Cool. So I'm going to add a new blank form. I'm going to refresh the form types from the server because I made a change, and that change isn't reflected on my phone until I do that. And then I'm going to go down here to the test TPL form. And if I've done it right, which I have, you'll see that color has been set to blue. Okay, that was a pretty simple example. We just want to make sure that it works. All right, so let me close this for a second. We're going to go do a slightly more complicated example. And we're going to go back into Edit Custom Code. And then we're going to say for item, we're going to say once we've changed the item, what I'd like to do is I'd like to see what the user entered into that item field. So let's, I'm going to paste in some custom code. Grab that here. I think that's, here it is. And this is going to use an if statement. We talked about statements last week. And here's how it goes. If #item equals Beagle, that means that if what was typed into the item field is equal to the word Beagle, like the dog, uppercase or lowercase, I don't know if you remember that from last week, but equal will work on both cases, then I want you to set these other fields. I want you to set the color, the height in centimeters, the width in centimeters, and the weight in kilograms for the Beagle. But otherwise, if it's not a Beagle, then just leave those fields alone. So let me go ahead and save that. And we're going to push those changes back up onto the server. Let me open up my phone again, turn mirroring back on. All right. It's starting. Here we go. I'm going to add a blank form. And of course, I'm going to remember to click refresh from server because I made a change. And then down here where it says test TPL, I'm going to tap the plus button. And so we still have that first rule, which set the color to blue. But now the item, we're going to type in Beagle. And I'm going to click the check mark. And you'll see it's changed color to brown, and it's inserted the weight, the width, and the height for me. So that's all you really need to know about events. So it's a simple one, but I thought that it deserved its own separate class. Now, are there any questions that we have on this topic? And if not, I'll tell you a little bit about next week, which will be hosted by Sarah Mitchell, head of our documentation department. She's going to be going over objects and arrays, and that's where stuff gets really interesting, where you get to populate drop-down lists and work with lists of data all at once, and work with objects as well, which you'll learn about. So, Sarah, I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add. Give you a minute to speak.
Nothing I'd really add, but I do want to just reinforce the point that it's very important that you name your buttons.
Okay, that is, yeah. In fact, let me just show you what happens if you don't. That's because it's easy to make that mistake. I showed you one of the earlier slides that you need to be making sure that you, let me get my phone out of the way here. Sorry about that. Turn off mirroring. All right. So if you can recall from this slide here, I had a button, and because I didn't do anything, it didn't actually give the button a name at all. And at least with the other fields, it gives them a name. With buttons, it doesn't. So if you don't name that button, there's really no way to address it. So make sure that when you are setting up TransForm, we're just going to go right into commands, that you say they call it the action name. So you're going to say the action name is whatever you decide to call it. Here I gave it the boring name, my button. So that's a really good point. I have run into that myself a couple times and said, what the heck's going on? I was like, oops, forgot to name my action name. So if that is it, I want to thank you, Sarah, for joining today. Thank you, everyone who showed up. And next week, like I said, Sarah will be joining us to talk about objects and arrays. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please send them to tfservice, that's as in transform service, at alphasoftware.com. Thanks very much. Stay well and see you next week. Bye-bye.